I was born in Berlin in the early 1932s into a family steeped in knowledge and inquiry. My father, a respected professor of European history, spent countless hours tracing the rise and fall of empires, instilling in me an awareness of the weight of decisions and the fragility of human institutions. My mother, a fearless journalist, traveled across Europe to report on stories that others avoided, returning with hands ink-stained and eyes sharp with observation. From them, I inherited both curiosity and a relentless need to understand the world, not just its events, but the human motives behind them. Even as a child, I noticed the subtlest gestures, the hidden tension in voices, the unspoken stories behind casual expressions. Languages came naturally. I learned English, Russian, and French as easily as I learned to navigate the streets of Berlin. Politics, diplomacy, and social currents fascinated me, shaping the lens through which I would later interpret every encounter and evaluate each situation. I was aware even then that knowledge could be both shield and weapon. When the city became divided and the Cold War cast long shadows over daily life, I found myself drawn into the clandestine world of intelligence. My motivations were intertwined, a desire to protect my homeland, a need to survive, and the thrill of stepping into a game that demanded skill, subtlety, and nerve. But alongside this purpose came constant internal conflict. I longed to act rightly, to honor ideals instilled by my parents, yet the world demanded secrecy, deception, and alliances that often contradicted my conscience. The duality of my life, caught between duty and morality, loyalty and survival, would define every step I took in the shadows of Berlin. Berlin, in the 1950 seconds, was a city suspended between past devastation and a tense, uncertain future. The scars of World War II were everywhere. Bombed out buildings lined the streets, shattered pavements bore witness to the chaos of previous years, and neighborhoods still carried the quiet tension of absence and loss. Yet life persisted. Children played in rubble-strewn courtyards, streetcars, clattered along familiar routes and cafes, hummed with the cautious optimism of people trying to rebuild. For those unaware of the undercurrents, Berlin appeared ordinary. But for someone attuned to subtle signals like me, the city was alive with hidden patterns, whispered threats, and the invisible pressures of divided governance. The city was split into sectors controlled by the Allies in the West and the Soviets in the East. The Western districts, symbolizing democracy and capitalist opportunity, contrasted sharply with the Eastern zones where Soviet oversight imposed surveillance, repression, and suspicion on daily life. Every street corner could conceal a patrol, every alleyway a potential informant. Citizens moved with cautious habits, learned gestures of subtlety and discretion, because in a city like this, trust was a rare commodity. In the midst of this, the clandestine world of espionage flourished. Agents moved silently between sectors, gathering information, recruiting contacts, and intercepting messages. The city itself became both stage and opponent, teaching lessons that no classroom could provide. Each patrol, each whispered conversation, and each fleeting shadow carried weight. One misstep could expose months of planning and endanger not only my own life, but the lives of those who relied on me. Berlin's environment shaped the way I would operate: the dim glow of streetlights on wet cobblestones, the sound of distant trams echoing through empty streets, and the occasional hum of reconnaissance planes overhead. Every sensory cue, light, sound, movement, could be the difference between safety and compromise. The city's rhythm demanded vigilance, situational awareness, and patience. And so, stepping into this divided metropolis, I understood that survival required more than skill it demanded: perception, adaptability, and a deep understanding of both human behavior and the shadows in which they moved. Here, amid the tension, I would navigate my first missions, learning that in Berlin, nothing was as it seemed, and every ordinary moment could conceal extraordinary peril. From the very beginning, I understood that the streets of Berlin were fraught with hidden dangers. Each step could reveal me to an observer. Each casual conversation might carry unintended consequences, and every action could ripple far beyond my own comprehension. The city's shadows were thick with surveillance, both official and unofficial, and I knew that in this world, vigilance had to become instinct. Nothing could be taken for granted. The threats were not only external. Operating as a double agent required constant navigation of moral and strategic tensions. Loyalty to one side could mean betrayal to another. Providing information might save lives, yet every secret pass was a compromise, a potential shadow over my conscience. I carried this knowledge like a weight in my chest, aware that it would shape every decision, every movement, and every thought in the missions ahead. Even the simplest routines became exercises in caution. Walking through the crowded streets, I analyzed patterns of passers-by, noting who appeared unusually attentive, whose gestures seemed rehearsed, and which corners might conceal a tale. The hum of the city trams clattering, distant sirens, wailing street vendors calling was both cover and threat. Each day presented a delicate balance, blending in while observing, calculating without hesitation, acting decisively yet invisibly. At the same time, anticipation mingled with apprehension. I knew that the first mission when it came would test every skill I had been trained to use. It would challenge my judgment, my nerve, and my ability to reconcile duty with conscience. I sensed that mistakes could have consequences far beyond personal risk, endangering contacts, jeopardizing missions, and leaving permanent marks on my psyche. And yet, amid the tension, there was a flicker of purpose and resolve, the understanding that these trials, however perilous, were necessary to navigate the shadow battlefield I had entered. Stepping deeper into this divided city, I carried with me a singular awareness in Berlin. The line between safety and exposure was razor thin, and survival demanded not only skill, but an unyielding attention to the complexities of human behavior and the subtle signals embedded in every street, every building, and every shadow. The challenges ahead were looming, and I would soon learn just how demanding this life in the shadows could be. The day I was briefed on my first mission, the air in the safe house felt heavy yet electric with anticipation. My handler, a man whose expression had long ceased to reveal emotion, handed me a slim envelope containing instructions that would define the coming weeks of my life. The task was precise: follow a mid-level East German official responsible for operations at a radar station on the outskirts of Berlin, observe and report without detection. The target was careful, the environment monitored, and any mistake could be catastrophic. I was introduced to a small team of operatives who would guide me through the initial phase. One had years of experience navigating the divided streets. Another specialized in coded communications. Their advice was terse, exacting, and unyielding: avoid patterns, never linger, and always anticipate observation. The rules were simple but absolute, leaving no margin for error. Each word, each directive etched itself into my mind, reinforcing the gravity of the assignment. Preparation consumed the next hours. I packed the essentials with meticulous care: a miniature recorder concealed in my coat, lining a slim folder for notes, a wristwatch synchronized for precise timings, and a forged passport to cover emergencies. My attire was deliberately unremarkable: a plain coat, a hat low over my eyes, a bag that could pass unnoticed in the hands of any passerby. Each item was both a tool and a shield, and I rehearsed my movements repeatedly, mentally mapping each step before leaving the safe house. As I stepped into Berlin's streets, a wave of apprehension surged. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the tram clattering over cobblestones. Every face in the crowd, every figure in uniform, every shadow held the potential for discovery. Yet, beneath the fear, there was an undeniable thrill. I was no longer a student of espionage or an observer of shadows. I was part of them, moving, deliberately, calculating each action, balancing instinct with discipline. A thought repeated itself as I walked toward the first observation point: every step I take now could change everything. Fear and exhilaration intertwined, sharpening my senses and heightening awareness. The world had narrowed to a series of calculated movements, silent observations, and split-second decisions. In that moment, I understood that espionage was not just a profession, it was a crucible, and I had just stepped into the fire. The first days of training were grueling in a way that textbooks and briefings could never capture. The classroom was sparse, the walls bare, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken tension. Instructors, veterans of Berlin's shadow streets, pushed us relentlessly, emphasizing that a single lapse in judgment could cost not only our lives, but the lives of innocent civilians and colleagues. The exercises were precise, exacting, and exhausting. We started with the fundamentals: reading body language, identifying potential tales, and recognizing even the subtlest signs of surveillance. I learned to detect hesitation in a passerby, a glance lingering just long enough to unsettle the almost imperceptible shift in posture that indicated observation. Each drill was designed to sharpen instincts, to make instinctive what would later be life-saving reflexes. The exercises demanded constant vigilance, turning fear into a tool rather than an obstacle. Simulated operations followed. Mock offices, abandoned buildings, and stage meetings became arenas for testing our abilities under pressure. My partner, a seasoned operative, assumed the role of an adversary, appearing unexpectedly to challenge my focus. I learned to think and react simultaneously, calculating every move while masking my intentions behind a facade of normalcy. Success required mental agility, rapid assessment, and the ability to improvise. Failure, I was warned repeatedly, was not an option. Beyond the physical and tactical demands, the training probed psychological resilience. We kept journals recording every moment of fear, hesitation, and moral conflict. I wrote about the tension between duty and conscience, the gnawing awareness that every choice carried consequences beyond the immediate moment. Could I deceive, manipulate, and operate in the shadows without losing the essence of who I was? These questions would follow me into the field, shaping decisions that could not be rehearsed or simulated. By the end of this initial phase, I felt both exhausted and sharpened, like steel tempered in fire. Every skill acquired, every instinct honed became part of an invisible toolkit I would rely upon in the missions to come. The city outside remained the same Berlin I had known, yet within the controlled chaos of training, I had glimpsed the reality that awaited me, a world where observation, quick thinking, and moral courage were the only currency that mattered. I was prepared in theory for the unknown, but the true test would begin the moment I stepped into the streets as a shadow among shadows. The morning I was to leave Berlin seemed unusually still. The streets that usually hummed with life were quiet, as if the city itself sensed the weight of the decisions I was about to make. In our modest apartment, the sunlight spilled across worn floors, highlighting the familiar objects that now felt imbued with meaning. My father's books, my mother's stacks of notes and photographs, reminders of a life anchored in knowledge and observation. My mother pressed a small envelope into my hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "For when you are alone," she whispered. Inside were words of caution, hope, and love written carefully in her hand. "Remember who you are," she said. "Even in shadows, integrity matters." My father, whose demeanor usually conveyed steady authority, offered a rare, unguarded glance. "Trust your judgment," he said softly. "One misstep can ripple far beyond your life." Their guidance, heavy with concern and wisdom, lingered in my mind as I prepared to step into the unknown. I packed a few personal items to carry with me: a photograph of my family, a silver pocket watch from my grandfather, and a small notebook for recording observations. Each item was a lifeline, a tangible reminder of who I was beneath the layers of disguise and deception that my work demanded. As I left the apartment and stepped into the streets, a mixture of fear, resolve, and exhilaration coursed through me. Every passerby could be an observer, every glance could conceal suspicion. And yet there was a strange thrill in moving unnoticed, in knowing that my skills and instincts would be tested in ways that books and training could not replicate. I told myself repeatedly, survive, observe, adapt. The farewell was more than a simple goodbye. It was a transformation. I was leaving behind the safety of family and the ordinary rhythms of life, stepping into a world where every decision, every movement, and every thought could carry consequences that would echo far beyond myself. In that moment, I became not just a son of Berlin, but a participant in the hidden war unfolding beneath its streets, a shadow moving among shadows. The first days in the field were a mixture of tension and discovery. Berlin streets, familiar to me in ordinary life, now felt charged with unseen eyes and hidden dangers. Every tram ride, every crowded market, every cafe became a stage where observation and caution were paramount. I moved deliberately, adjusting my pace, watching faces, and memorizing subtle details that might otherwise escape notice. Each day was a delicate choreography of blending in while observing, calculating each movement while remaining invisible. I began by following my target discreetly, noting patterns in his routine, the streets he favored, the timing of his meetings, the gestures that indicated communication with subordinates. I kept mental logs, replaying each observation repeatedly to ensure nothing was overlooked. Even seemingly mundane details, a glance, a hand resting on a railing, a pause at a street corner, could carry information critical to the mission. Every observation became a test of patience and vigilance. Threats were constant, though often subtle. I sensed eyes on me more than once, figures whose presence lingered just long enough to trigger caution. I learned to improvise on the spot, altering my path, shifting posture, merging into the crowd. The city itself became both ally and adversary. Shadows offered concealment, rain, muffled footsteps, yet the urban maze could also expose a single misstep. Information arrived slowly at first, snippets overheard in passing, a document glimpsed through a window-coded signals embedded in routine interactions. Each piece, however minor, became a thread in the web I was weaving. Patience was essential, haste could betray me. Despite the tension, there was an undeniable thrill in the work. The thrill of observing without being observed, of connecting scattered pieces of information, of anticipating movements before they happened, it was intoxicating. Yet it was tempered by constant fear, the awareness that one wrong step could undo everything. Each day reinforced a crucial lesson. Espionage was not measured in victories or confrontations, but in the quiet precision of movement, the careful reading of human behavior, and the relentless discipline to survive in the shadows. By the end of those initial days, I felt both exposed and empowered. The streets had become a living classroom, testing every skill I had acquired. Each observation, each discreet note, each careful maneuver was a small victory. But the true challenges and the deeper moral and personal trials were still to come. In the brief pauses between missions, communication became a lifeline. The terse exchanges with my handler were always loaded with significance. Remember, he would say "I," scanning the streets as though every passerby could be an agent. One careless move can undo months of preparation. Trust your instincts, but follow the rules. Each phrase was weighted, a reminder that observation, calculation, and subtlety were as vital as courage. Conversations with colleagues, though few and carefully measured, were opportunities to confirm patterns, share insights, and reinforce tactics, all while maintaining a careful facade. Letters to my family became a secret refuge. Each envelope contained fragments of my inner life I could not voice elsewhere. "Mother," I wrote, "the city is alive with hidden currents. Every face could conceal danger, yet I must navigate these streets carefully, balancing caution with action. Fear follows me, but so does determination." The letters allowed me to articulate the tension, the exhilaration, and the moral dilemmas I faced without compromising operational security. In these exchanges, I allowed myself honesty, admitting doubts and fears that I otherwise masked in public. My journal, meanwhile, became both companion and mirror. I recorded minutiae, the cadence of footsteps on cobblestones, the subtle gestures of informants, the irregularities in a target's routine. I wrote about the persistent tension between duty and conscience, questioning whether deception could coexist with personal integrity. Could I continue to manipulate, to observe, and to deceive without losing the core of who I was? The journal entries became a repository of reflection, shaping decisions, and fortifying mental resilience. Through these dialogues, letters, and journal reflections, I navigated not only the streets of Berlin, but the terrain of my own psyche. Communication, whether with a trusted colleague, a distant family member, or the blank pages of my notebook, provided grounding, focus, and a sense of continuity amidst the uncertainty. It reminded me that even in the shadows, human connection, memory, and conscience remain vital forces, guiding every step, every observation, and every choice in the dangerous and unpredictable world of espionage. By the close of my initial weeks in the field, I felt the full weight of the world pressing against every decision. The streets of Berlin, once ordinary and familiar, had transformed into a complex web of observation, danger, and unseen eyes. Each glance from a passerby, each distant footstep, each shadow along the alley could be a threat. I had learned in the harshest way that vigilance must become instinct and that every movement carried potential consequences. Emotionally, the strain was intense. The thrill of observation, the small victories of gathering intelligence, and the exhilaration of remaining unseen were constantly intertwined with fear, doubt, and moral tension. The disappearance or capture of colleagues, the potential endangerment of informants, and the ever-present uncertainty created a mental pressure that refused to dissipate. Sleep came in fitful fragments, and moments of rest were always tinged with alertness. Cognitively, however, I had grown sharper. I had learned to anticipate behavior, detect subtle deviations from patterns, and calculate risks with precision. The exercises, missions, and ethical dilemmas had honed both my analytical skills and my intuition. Yet I understood that this was only the beginning. The true crucible lay ahead in missions that would test not only my ability to survive, but also my capacity to navigate moral ambiguity and confront the deepest challenges of conscience. I stepped into the next phase with awareness, cautious resolve, and the recognition that in Berlin, every step in the shadows would carry weight far beyond the immediate moment. The morning of my first high-stakes mission arrived like a storm concealed in sunlight. I had been assigned to monitor a mid-level East German official connected to a strategic radar station on the outskirts of Berlin. The briefing had been minimal: observe, record, and report, but above all, do not be seen. The target was meticulous and the environment heavily patrolled. One mistake could unravel weeks of preparation, endangering not only myself but others whose lives depended on the intelligence. I trailed him from a discreet distance, blending into the crowd with deliberate movements. Every gesture, every glance, every step had to be calculated. I memorized his routines, how he crossed streets, the cadence of his footsteps, the slight signals he gave to subordinates. Mental notes became vital, recorded invisibly in my mind or through the tiny recorder concealed in my coat. Every detail, however minute, could prove critical in the unfolding web of intelligence. Tension escalated when a uniformed officer's gaze lingered a little too long in my direction. My heart raced as instinct overtook thought. A subtle shift in posture, a slight adjustment of my coat, a casual readjustment of my bag, all choreographed to appear ordinary yet deliberate, allowed me to slip unnoticed into a shadowed doorway. The officer paused, then moved on. Relief mixed with adrenaline, leaving me acutely aware of the razor-thin line separating survival from exposure. I realized then that espionage was a war of the mind more than the body. Physical challenges, the running, hiding, or navigating streets were secondary to the constant calculations, anticipations, and judgments. Each decision carried weight. Hesitation could be fatal, yet action demanded precision and courage. The sensory awareness, the mental stamina, and the ability to remain composed under pressure were as crucial as any tool or skill. By the end of that first operation, exhaustion and exhilaration coexisted. Fear, anticipation, and the thrill of success mingled within me. I had stepped beyond the world of training and preparation into the living, breathing crucible of espionage. The streets of Berlin had become a chessboard, each person a piece whose intentions I had to anticipate. In that moment, I understood the true nature of my path, a life in the shadows where survival depended on observation, instinct, and the constant negotiation between fear and resolve. The weeks that followed my first mission were relentless, testing both my skill and my mental endurance. The streets of Berlin no longer felt merely familiar. They had transformed into a labyrinth of potential threats. Shadows hid more than darkness. They concealed danger, suspicion, and the constant reminder that the smallest misstep could be fatal. The first personal blow came quietly, yet its impact was profound. A fellow operative, someone I had trained with and come to trust implicitly, disappeared during a routine observation. Rumors circulated through coded channels he had been captured, perhaps interrogated, perhaps worse. The uncertainty weighed heavily, gnawing at my focus and clouding my thoughts. Every shadowed alley, every distant footstep, every face in a crowd became a potential harbinger of loss. Fear had become a constant companion. Soon after, the fragile network of trust was shaken further. An informant previously reliable began sending conflicting signals. Their gestures and messages hinted at hidden motives, raising suspicions I could not ignore. I questioned every interaction, replayed decisions in my mind, and scrutinized even the smallest details, aware that a single oversight could compromise the mission or endanger lives. The mental strain was relentless. The line between vigilance and paranoia blurred. Sleep was elusive, and the nights were haunted by imagined scenarios of exposure, capture, and the consequences of failure. I recorded my thoughts in a journal, attempting to anchor myself in reason, yet the pressure continued to mount. The moral dimension of espionage was as demanding as the physical. Each choice, whom to trust, what to reveal, and when to act, was fraught with ethical weight. Could I continue to deceive and manipulate without losing the person I had been? These questions became inseparable from every action. Despite the fear, I pressed on. The losses, betrayals, and near misses sharpened my instincts and honed my awareness. Each observation became more deliberate, each decision more precise. I learned to compartmentalize anxiety, converting it into vigilance and strategy. Survival in this clandestine world demanded not only skill but mental resilience, ethical discernment, and an acceptance that the shadows of Berlin would test me in ways far deeper than any physical challenge. After the initial waves of fear and loss, the rhythm of operations became relentless. Each day introduced a new assignment, new targets, and new risks that demanded every ounce of focus and discipline. I shadowed different officials, monitored meetings, and tracked communications always, with the understanding that even a minor lapse could compromise the entire network. Berlin had become a living chessboard, and I was forced to anticipate moves several steps ahead. The targets were increasingly unpredictable. One day, a communications officer whose routine seemed mundane, the next, a logistics coordinator with erratic hours. Each mission required careful observation, the patient accumulation of details, and constant vigilance. A gesture, a pause, a repeated glance all could provide critical intelligence. Success relied on subtlety and endurance as well as the ability to suppress fear while acting decisively. Threats intensified. Patrols appeared where none were expected. Shadows seemed to follow me for longer than chance allowed, and informants sometimes sent ambiguous or misleading signals. I had to improvise, adapting routes, adjusting behavior, and using misdirection to avoid detection. The city itself was both ally and adversary. Dark alleys offered concealment, misty nights, muffled footsteps, yet the same environment could expose even the smallest error. Each mission became a delicate dance between visibility and invisibility. Amid the tension, small victories fueled determination. Discovering a hidden document, overhearing an unexpected conversation, or anticipating a target's movements brought fleeting satisfaction. Yet these successes were always tempered by awareness of the stakes. Every step carried potential consequences far beyond my immediate perception. Failure was measured not in lessons learned, but in lives at risk. By the end of these successive missions, I felt both sharpened and worn. Fear had become a tool, vigilance a habit, and calculation second nature. The physical streets of Berlin were now only part of the battlefield. The mental and emotional challenges were equally, if not more, demanding. Every mission reinforced the understanding that espionage was a continuous test of intellect, instinct, and resilience. A world where adrenaline and anxiety were inseparable companions, and where survival depended on mastering both the external environment and the internal landscape of the mind. It was a rain-slicked evening when the danger became unmistakably real. My assignment was to enter a lightly guarded communications facility on the outskirts of East Berlin believed to hold critical intelligence. Though I had prepared meticulously, the moment I approached the entrance, I realized that preparation alone would not guarantee success. As I rounded a corner, a patrol unexpectedly appeared, boots clattering on wet cobblestones. My pulse raced, my breath caught, and instinct overtook conscious thought. I pressed myself against a shadowed wall, adjusting my coat and posture to appear casual, blending into the dim light. The officer's gaze lingered sharp and assessing before moving on. Relief surged, tempered immediately by the awareness of how close I had come to exposure. The real danger followed moments later. In my hurry to reach the entrance, I slipped on the slick stone, twisting my ankle and scraping my forearm on the jagged edge of a brick wall. Sharp pain shot through me, but I could not pause for long. The mission demanded progress, and hesitation could mean detection. I steadied myself, drawing deep breaths, and carefully resumed my approach, acutely aware that every movement had become an exercise in calculated precision. Inside the facility, the tension escalated. I moved quietly, extracting information while avoiding cameras, sensors, and the faint hum of distant machinery. Each document I copied and each observation recorded felt like a victory, but I was ever conscious that one misstep could ruin the operation entirely. Every sound, every shadow, every subtle shift in the environment demanded constant awareness. When I finally exited into the rainy streets, a mix of exhaustion, exhilaration, and relief washed over me. My ankle throbbed, forearm ached, yet I had survived without detection. That night, I reflected on the duality of espionage, physical skill, and mental acuity were only part of the equation. Resilience, adaptability, and the ability to manage fear under pressure were equally vital. I had glimpsed the razor-thin margin separating success from failure, and the intricate interplay of risk instinct and moral responsibility that defined life in the shadows. From that point forward, every mission carried the weight of experience. I understood that survival depended not just on observation and training, but on mastering the unpredictable forces of circumstance, human behavior, and the constant pressing awareness of one's own mortality. Berlin was no longer merely a city. It had transformed into a living, breathing battlefield. Every street, alley, and building seemed to hold secrets, dangers, and unseen eyes. The aftermath of war still lingered. Bombed-out structures, jagged cobblestones, and crumbling facades reminded me of the city's scars, while the divided sectors imposed invisible borders that required constant attention. For someone like me, every detail from the tilt of a window shutter to the cadence of footsteps carried significance. The environment was both ally and adversary. Low-hanging mist from industrial zones softened shadows and concealed movement, yet it also distorted perceptions, making routine routes unpredictable. Rain-slicked streets reflected streetlights, creating glimmers that could obscure or betray a presence. The faint hum of machinery in factories, the distant rumble of trams, and the occasional overhead reconnaissance plane all contributed to a symphony of sounds that I had to parse, constantly discerning threat from ordinary urban noise. Visual cues were equally vital. Uniformed patrols moved with predictable rhythms, yet a single deviation could indicate suspicion or an unexpected change in security protocols. Crowds in markets and streets offered cover, but their density also introduced uncertainty. Each observation required attentiveness. A hand adjusting a coat, a pause at an intersection, or an unusual glance could signal intelligence of value or a hidden threat. The city demanded that I merge with it, anticipate it, and respect its unpredictability. Psychologically, living in this environment sharpened both instincts and awareness. I learned to interpret Berlin as more than a backdrop. It was a dynamic participant in every operation. Each day, the streets tested patience, adaptability, and composure. Every action, from blending into a crowd to discreetly recording notes, became a calculated risk. The environment imposed a constant state of vigilance, a tension that required balancing observation, discretion, and mental endurance. Through these experiences, I understood that espionage extended far beyond physical skill. Survival in Berlin demanded acute sensory perception, strategic thinking, and the ability to endure stress that was both constant and invisible. The city itself became a teacher, a place where each shadow, sound, and gesture was a lesson, and where every misstep could carry consequences far beyond the immediate moment. In Berlin, I realized the true battlefield existed not only on streets and in buildings, but within the mind of the operative navigating them. As the missions accumulated, the weight of each decision pressed upon me relentlessly. Espionage was not merely a series of tasks. It was a continuous negotiation between duty, survival, and conscience. Every piece of information I gathered carried moral consequences. Deception was necessary, but the faces of those I observed, sometimes fearful, sometimes unaware, reminded me that human lives were entwined with each act. Could I continue to manipulate, deceive, and intrude without losing a part of myself in the process? The first major moral dilemma emerged when a source previously trusted revealed details that could prevent a potential breach. Acting on this intelligence meant exposing them to great personal danger, possibly arrest or worse. Yet withholding it might allow harm to occur on a larger scale. The tension between loyalty and ethical responsibility became immediate and inescapable. I weighed the outcomes, repeatedly recognizing that any choice would carry ramifications far beyond my immediate perception. The balance between action and restraint, between protecting lives and fulfilling duty, was razor thin. These dilemmas extended into every interaction. Choosing whom to trust, when to act, and how much to reveal required constant evaluation. Each decision became a test of character, forcing me to reconcile instinct with principle. I found myself questioning not only the strategy but the fundamental ethics of the work I had committed to. Could success in espionage ever justify the moral compromises it demanded? Could I remain human while navigating a world built on shadows and deception? Gradually, my perspective shifted. The missions were no longer just exercises in surveillance and intelligence gathering. They became mirrors reflecting the complexities of human nature, the ambiguity of right and wrong, and the profound cost of knowledge. I learned to anticipate not just physical threats, but ethical conflicts, preparing for scenarios where the correct course was not clear. The lessons were harsh but indispensable. Resilience, discernment, and moral courage were as critical as skill or instinct. By the end of this phase, I understood that survival in espionage required more than agility and intellect. It demanded the ability to navigate moral ambiguity, to make choices where every path carried risk, and to bear the consequences of those decisions. The shadows of Berlin were not merely physical. They were ethical, psychological, and emotional, shaping not only my actions, but the person I was becoming. It was during one of the routine observation shifts that I stumbled upon intelligence of unprecedented significance. The office I had been monitoring, previously deemed mundane, began to reveal subtle anomalies. Documents were relocated at odd hours, meetings were scheduled in obscure locations, and coded messages moved through channels that suggested urgency. My instincts, sharpened by weeks of missions, alerted me that this was no ordinary operation. The discovery was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had uncovered evidence indicating a coordinated effort by East German authorities and their Soviet allies to infiltrate key Western intelligence positions. The implications were staggering. Lives, operations, and the delicate equilibrium of the divided city hung in the balance. Holding this knowledge meant that every decision from that moment forward carried immense responsibility, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. A profound moral dilemma presented itself. Acting on the intelligence could prevent disaster but would expose the network of contacts I had painstakingly cultivated. Remaining silent might protect them but risked a larger catastrophe. Each option was fraught with potential loss, and the consequences were unpredictable. I replayed scenarios in my mind, endlessly evaluating risks, timing, and the probable outcomes of each possible course of action. The mental burden was enormous, far beyond any physical challenge I had faced. Ultimately, I chose to relay the intelligence through secure indirect channels, minimizing the risk to my contacts while ensuring the information reached those capable of acting on it. The decision was made with a mixture of relief, apprehension, and an acute awareness of responsibility. I understood that the effects of this choice would unfold, gradually influencing lives, operations, and the broader balance of power in ways I could not fully anticipate. In that moment, I grasped the full magnitude of my role. Espionage was not merely about gathering information, it was a test of judgment, morality, and psychological resilience. Every decision, every observation, every calculated risk now carried weight far beyond immediate survival. The streets of Berlin, the shadows I had navigated, and the people whose lives intersected with mine had become part of a vast, complex puzzle. I emerged from this turning point irrevocably altered, aware that the next missions would demand not just skill and cunning, but the full measure of my conscience and courage. By the end of these intense weeks, the weight of every mission, every decision, and every close call had left an indelible mark. Berlin had transformed from a familiar city into a complex, perilous landscape where every street, alley, and shadow carried potential risk. Each operation, each observation had sharpened my skills, but had also revealed the fragile line between success and catastrophe. The experiences had tested not only my physical capabilities, but also my moral judgment and psychological resilience. Emotionally, the toll was immense. Moments of triumph were tempered by fear, loss, and lingering doubt. Colleagues had vanished or been compromised, and the ethical compromises demanded by my role weighed heavily. Sleep was fitful and constant. Vigilance had become both habit and burden. Every decision felt consequential, and the implications of each action extended far beyond the immediate moment. Yet, amidst exhaustion and anxiety, a sense of clarity had emerged. I had honed my ability to anticipate behavior, to interpret subtle cues, and to act decisively under pressure. I had learned to navigate moral ambiguity, to balance loyalty with conscience, and to endure the psychological strains inherent in espionage. As I prepared to move into the next phase, I understood that the true challenges were only beginning. The consequences of prior actions, the losses endured, and the lessons learned would define my path forward. The crucible of Berlin had already tested me, and the weeks ahead promised trials that would demand every ounce of skill, resilience, and moral fortitude I could muster. The aftermath of the high-stakes operations was immediate and inescapable. Each mission had left traces, subtle patterns of movement, small inconsistencies in contacts' behavior, and faint hints that both sides were beginning to notice. The streets of Berlin, which had once felt familiar and navigable, now seemed fraught with hidden observation. Every passerby, every patrolling officer, every shadow corner reminded me that even the smallest error could unravel weeks of work, endangering lives and compromising the fragile network I had built. The first personal shock came with the disappearance of a close colleague, someone I had relied upon implicitly. Rumors reached me through coded channels, capture interrogation, perhaps worse. The uncertainty gnawed at me, shadowing every decision and forcing an acute awareness of vulnerability. Every alleyway and street became a potential trap, and the sense of isolation pressed heavily. Fear had become an ever-present companion, shaping not only my movements, but my thoughts, heightening vigilance to an almost unbearable degree. Simultaneously, I recognized the operational repercussions. Some informants became cautious or unresponsive, while previously reliable networks displayed signs of strain. Missions that once seemed straightforward now carried heightened risk. The fragile equilibrium of intelligence gathering had shifted. The smallest oversight could cascade into significant consequences. Mental energy was consumed as much by anticipation and analysis as by the physical act of observation. My journal became a tool not only for recording intelligence, but for processing the relentless pressure of ethical dilemmas, operational hazards, and potential losses. Physically, the consequences manifested subtly but persistently. The cumulative fatigue, minor injuries from hurried maneuvers, and the stress of constant vigilance took their toll. Psychologically, the strain was far deeper. Anxiety, sleeplessness, and intrusive thoughts became part of the daily routine. Each observation, each interaction carried an invisible weight responsibility for colleagues, informants, and the balance of operations across the city. Through these immediate consequences, I came to understand the stark reality of espionage. It was not merely a series of missions, but a continuous crucible testing intellect, instinct, and conscience. Survival demanded more than skill. It required constant awareness of the moral and operational ripples set in motion by every action. The lessons were harsh but indispensable, preparing me for the longer-term challenges that awaited in the unfolding conflict of shadows. The most daunting aspect of this phase was not the physical danger, but the moral and strategic choices that confronted me at every turn. One evening, I faced a scenario that crystallized the relentless tension of my work. A key informant had inadvertently provided intelligence that could prevent a significant operational breach. Acting on this information might save lives and avert disaster, but it would also expose the source to grave risk, potentially leading to capture, interrogation, or worse. The decision loomed over me, demanding careful consideration under the shadow of urgency. I weighed the options meticulously. To act was to fulfill my duty to prevent harm on a broader scale, yet doing so could endanger an individual whose trust I had cultivated over months. To remain silent preserved their safety, but at the potential cost of catastrophe for countless others. Each path was fraught with moral and operational hazards, and the consequences of any choice were uncertain. The gravity of the situation pressed on my consciousness, intertwining fear, responsibility, and ethical reflection. These dilemmas extended into every interaction, every movement, and every decision. Could I continue to navigate this shadow world without losing the essence of who I was? Could the demands of duty and survival justify the compromises made along the way? I recognized that espionage was as much a contest of conscience as it was a game of skill, requiring the endurance to confront uncertainty and reconcile conflicting obligations. After hours of deliberation, I chose to relay the intelligence through a secure, indirect channel, minimizing exposure to my source while ensuring that the information reached the proper authorities. Relief was immediate, yet tempered by apprehension. Had I truly safeguarded those at risk? Could the intelligence be acted upon without collateral damage? Each question underscored the delicate balance I had to maintain between operational success and moral responsibility. In the days that followed, the consequences rippled through my network. Every decision, every risk taken became a lesson in the interconnectedness of action, morality, and survival. I learned that true resilience in espionage demanded not only skill and adaptability, but also the courage to navigate ethical ambiguity and the capacity to endure the emotional weight of choices whose impacts extended far beyond my immediate perception. Following the difficult moral decisions, I was assigned a new set of operations that required not only heightened skill, but also adaptability to a different environment. The targets had shifted: officials working in industrial sectors, irregular schedules, and locations where civilian and military activity intertwined. The complexity of each mission increased, demanding precise observation, quick thinking, and careful anticipation of every variable. Adjusting to this new reality required recalibration. I refined my movements, blending more subtly into crowds, altering routes, and varying timings to avoid patterns. Tools and equipment, once sufficient, were supplemented with new methods, coded messages, discrete rendezvous points, and contingency plans that accounted for the unpredictable. Every action was measured, every interaction calculated. Mistakes were no longer theoretical. They could unravel the network or endanger lives immediately. The environment itself presented both hazards and opportunities. Industrial zones, with their dim lighting fog from chimneys and the hum of machinery, offered cover but also complicated surveillance. Streets were less predictable, with security patrols shifting in response to prior intelligence breaches. I had to read not only human behavior, but also the subtleties of the setting, the placement of vehicles, the patterns of foot traffic, the way shadows fell in narrow alleys. Mastery of this terrain became as critical as mastery of observation and disguise. Psychologically, the shift demanded more than strategy. It required resilience and mental agility. Fatigue, stress, and the lingering effects of previous missions tested my endurance. Each new assignment was a crucible, forcing me to balance caution with decisiveness and observation with immediate action. The stakes were higher, the margins thinner, and the consequences more unpredictable. Through these adaptations, I realized that survival in espionage extended far beyond skill or training. It required understanding the environment as a dynamic participant in operations, anticipating threats that were both physical and situational, and maintaining clarity of judgment under relentless pressure. Each mission reinforced the lesson that in this shadow world, every decision, movement, and observation could carry consequences that would echo far beyond the immediate moment. Berlin had become a living classroom, and every day offered both peril and education. As the weeks progressed, the cost of each mission became increasingly apparent. Colleagues who had once provided support, guidance, and camaraderie were now absent, some detained, some reassigned, and a few who had simply vanished. Each disappearance was a stark reminder that in this world, loyalty and skill did not guarantee survival. The network of intelligence I had painstakingly built showed signs of strain, and the loss of even one trusted contact reverberated across every operation. These personal losses were compounded by the awareness of moral compromise. Every decision I had made, every piece of intelligence I had shared, carried consequences beyond the immediate moment. I grappled with guilt and uncertainty, questioning whether the benefits of our actions outweighed the human cost. The line between right and wrong blurred in the fog of espionage, leaving me to reconcile operational success with ethical responsibility. Physically, the repeated demands of surveillance, long hours on the streets, and the constant tension left their mark. Minor injuries persisted, muscles ached, and the fatigue of endless vigilance became part of daily life. Psychologically, the burden was heavier. Sleep remained fragmented, and intrusive thoughts reminded me that every misstep could have ended not just my mission, but the lives of others. Anxiety and hypervigilance had become companions, shaping both perception and decision-making. Yet through these trials, clarity emerged. I learned to accept that loss was an inevitable part of this life, and that resilience required not only skill, but emotional endurance. The setbacks and moral dilemmas honed my instincts, deepened my understanding of human behavior, and refined my capacity for judgment under pressure. Survival depended not just on observation and strategy, but on the ability to endure the long-term consequences of actions taken in the shadows. By the end of this period, I recognized that these experiences were transforming me. Espionage was no longer merely a series of tasks. It had become a crucible for intellect, conscience, and character. The lessons learned from loss, danger, and moral ambiguity would shape my approach to every future mission, solidifying the understanding that in the clandestine world, every decision carried weight far beyond immediate perception. The streets of Berlin had become a classroom for survival, morality, and endurance, and I was learning the cost of living and acting within it. The turning point came unexpectedly hidden within the routines that had become second nature. I was observing a seemingly inconsequential communications office when subtle anomalies began to emerge. Documents were moved at unusual hours, meetings were scheduled in obscure locations, and messages flowed through channels that suggested urgency and significance. My instincts, honed through months of observation and analysis, signaled that I had stumbled upon intelligence of critical importance. The discovery revealed a coordinated operation by East German authorities in concert with Soviet oversight targeting key Western intelligence positions. The ramifications were staggering: lives, operations, and the fragile balance of the divided city could be at stake. Holding this knowledge meant that every subsequent decision carried immense responsibility, and the margin for error was non-existent. The weight of this responsibility pressed on my mind, intertwining fear, caution, and moral deliberation. A profound dilemma presented itself. Sharing the intelligence could avert disaster, but might expose the network of contacts I had meticulously cultivated. Remaining silent could preserve their safety, yet risk far-reaching consequences. I replayed every scenario, calculated potential outcomes, and weighed the stakes with painstaking care. Every choice felt simultaneously critical and morally ambiguous, a balancing act between duty, survival, and conscience. Ultimately, I relayed the intelligence through secure, indirect channels, minimizing exposure to my sources while ensuring actionable information reached those capable of intervention. The decision brought relief tempered by apprehension. Had I safeguarded the vulnerable while fulfilling my obligations, would the intelligence be effective without collateral damage? The complexity of these outcomes underscored the intricate interplay of strategy, morality, and risk in espionage. That moment crystallized my understanding of the role I inhabited. Espionage was no longer simply about observation or information gathering. It was a continuous negotiation between intellect, instinct, and ethical responsibility. The streets of Berlin, the hidden observers, and the lives of those connected to my actions were all part of a vast and delicate puzzle. Emerging from this turning point, I recognized that every mission forward would demand the full measure of my skill, judgment, and conscience, and that survival in the shadows required mastering not only the external environment, but the internal landscape of the mind. The war in shadows had come to its natural end, though the scars it left were indelible. I returned to Berlin, a city both familiar and irrevocably changed. The streets were quieter, the rubble mostly cleared, yet the air carried the weight of years of tension and conflict. Buildings still bore the subtle reminders of conflict, and the divisions between East and West were more pronounced than ever palpable in the cautious gestures of citizens and the distant hum of border patrols. I walked through familiar neighborhoods, noticing the same cafes and markets, but everything felt different. The city's heartbeat, once vibrant and chaotic, now carried a subdued, almost solemn rhythm. Memories of operations, close calls, and lost comrades hovered in every corner. Each alley, each street seemed to whisper the secrets of the missions I had carried out and the lives that had been affected along the way. Emotionally, I experienced a mixture of relief and haunting reflection. The fear that had accompanied every step of my clandestine activities was finally absent, yet it had been replaced by a profound awareness of what had been sacrificed. Friends and colleagues were gone, their absence an unhealable void. The moral compromises, the difficult decisions, and the constant pressure of survival had left their marks on my mind as vividly as any physical injury. Despite the lingering shadows of memory, there was also a fragile sense of accomplishment. I had survived, navigated the labyrinth of espionage, and safeguarded those I could. Yet survival came with a cost that could not be quantified. As I moved through the silent streets of Berlin, I carried both the relief of life preserved and the persistent weight of loss, understanding that the city's calm was only surface deep. Beneath it lay the echoes of every choice, every risk, and every moment spent navigating the perilous interplay of duty, morality, and survival. The physical toll of months operating in Berlin's shadow streets was tangible. Minor injuries, bruises, sprains, and cuts sustained during hurried maneuvers lingered as constant reminders of the perils I had faced. Fatigue clung to my muscles, a residual weight from countless nights spent moving silently, observing, and anticipating threats. Yet these physical marks were overshadowed by the deeper invisible effects that would persist far longer. Psychologically, the cost was profound. Anxiety had become a companion, a low hum that never entirely left my consciousness. Sleep was irregular and fractured, haunted by flashes of moments when a misstep could have meant discovery or death. Intrusive memories of colleagues captured or lost during missions surfaced unpredictably, and I found myself replaying decisions, questioning whether alternate choices could have spared someone or averted consequences. The moral compromises, while necessary, left an indelible imprint on my conscience. Each act of deception, each piece of intelligence passed or withheld carried with it a lingering weight, a reminder of the ethical ambiguity intrinsic to espionage. Yet amidst the psychological strain, a sense of endurance had emerged. The experiences had instilled resilience and sharpened judgment, teaching the necessity of balancing caution with decisive action. I had survived the shadow streets of Berlin, navigated the intricate web of human behavior, and endured the moral and operational pressures that defined a life in espionage. This endurance was both a shield and a burden, a reminder of what had been endured, and a guide for navigating the challenges of life beyond clandestine operations. The physical and psychological aftermath intertwined, shaping both perception and action. Simple streets could evoke vivid recollections of missions past, while ordinary interactions reminded me of the stakes once carried. I moved through the city aware of both the fragility and the strength that survival had fostered within me. In the quiet aftermath, I recognized that the true cost of espionage extended far beyond the immediate mission. It was embedded in body, mind, and the lingering echoes of choices made in the shadows. As I walked through the quiet streets of Berlin, the city seemed both familiar and alien, a place forever marked by the shadows I had navigated. Every building, every alley, every distant sound carried memories of missions, completed risks, survived, and choices made under pressure. I understood that my journey through espionage had changed me irrevocably, teaching lessons that no book or classroom could provide. The true measure of survival, I realized, was not merely the ability to evade detection or gather intelligence. It was the capacity to endure the weight of ethical dilemmas, to navigate uncertainty with both caution and courage. and to carry the consequences of every decision with awareness and reflection. Each mission, each close call, each moral compromise had shaped my understanding of human nature, loyalty, and the fragile boundaries between right and wrong. Though the fear and tension of those years lingered in memory, I also carried the knowledge of resilience and adaptability. The experiences taught me that life in the shadows was not just about survival, but about recognizing the value of conscience, judgment, and human connection even in the most perilous circumstances. In the end, I survived the crucible of Berlin's divided streets, yet I emerged forever altered. The city's calm masked the battles fought in silence, but within me the lessons remained vivid. And so I carry them forward, a reminder that courage, reflection, and moral vigilance are the truest forms of strength even in a world defined by shadows and secrecy. I survived the shadows of Berlin, and the memories of those streets will remain with me, shaping every choice I make in the light.